testing times for teachers. And what we're talking about is the difficult times, which is why they're testing times, that we're all going through because of the pandemic. But testing because testing is always a focus, of course, of our work, perniciously or not, or positively. But particularly in these days of being disconnected and lockdown, the ministry, the government has thought fit to focus particularly on the importance of assessment of pupils, assessment of teachers, as if this were the be-all and end-all. So this is our topic, and as you can see, I'll be talking about the transition from teaching face-to-face, teaching in the classroom, to teaching in the glassroom, if you get the pun, teaching online, glassroom for short. So this lady is the teacher that I've been working with as a teacher trainer. She works in a state school, and she's faced all of these challenges every day at work, and I've been sharing her experiences. And we decided that as the challenges were so insurmountable for one individual to cope with, that I volunteered to collaborate in her work. And we've set up this kind of collaborative teacher development, let's call it. She's been keeping a journal. Her name is Vicky Sarandillo, and she works in a state school here in Crete. And what I'll be showing you is how we've tried to tackle the challenges of the classroom and the glassroom together. She as a teacher, me as a trainer, observer, and I'll give you examples of the techniques that we've come up with. Not because we think they're a recipe for everybody, but because they may stimulate you into finding your own solutions. Along the lines, perhaps, of what you heard this morning from George Vasilakis and the others, from Cliff and Alexander, and I'll chip in with my two pennyworth, as we say, of ideas. But they're meant to stimulate you, not to tell you this is the way you should do things. Why is all this important? That's a good question. Well, it's pretty obvious, I suppose, but I love the way this lady, Elena Shohami, puts it. Here's a quotation from her book called The Power of Tests. And when you see a question, red question mark, or any kind of question I set you, I'd like you to at least mentally join in, think about what I'm asking you, write in the chat box if you wish. I'm sure Dimitri has reminded you to use the question and answers box for questions that you may want to talk about at the end. But here I'd like you to look at this quotation and choose 3 or 4 key words for you. Do a little bit of reading comprehension, like you might ask your students to do. Which are the key words? Which carry the main meaning for you here? Don't know if I can find the chat box so I can be distracted by your comments. I see there it is. So, and I can see you're there, so stop hiding. Do join in. This is an interactive presentation. So keywords. I see testing, barometer, self-worth, measurement. Well, I'm glad we seem to be more or less on the same wavelength. It's good that we have our own rapport, and rapport is a concept I shall be drawing on. So I'm glad we have a little bit of it as well. So there you are. I think the key words, and you seem to agree, are the obsession with measurement in education. So tests, of course, are powerful because they are an example of things that can be measured, quantified. But we are educators, so educational is a key concept. And how do you marry the educational principle to this obsession with measurement? And of course, we all know the effect that exams have on our learners and on teachers to some extent. And so anxiety is an important factor and may well be an obstacle to the effective educational function that we perform. And finally, and perhaps most important of all, is this concept of self-worth or self-esteem, call it what you will, autoektimici, autoestima. It's crucial for me, the driving force behind not only learning, but a lot of what we do in our real lives. That's why as Eleanor Shohani says, exams are important. She puts it beautifully. So let's take that as our starting point. So you don't feel I'm wasting your time. Okay, let's see. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Luke? Yes, we can. Here is the plan. Very briefly, these are some of the things I'll be looking at. So you have some idea of the journey today, as I call it. A flashback to before COVID, the lockdown and the initial impact of the lockdown on this particular teacher that I'm as an example. Life behind the mask, what does it really mean? And we listen to our students. A good place to start in solving all of our problems is actually to listen to the student's voice. George Vasilakis himself made an excellent suggestion this morning. Preparing students for speaking exams, a good thing to do is to get them to listen to their own voice, literally, and to assess themselves. What I'm saying here is let's listen to what they feel about the educational experience. So we'll look at that. Naturally, I should tell you what I think the difference is between testing and teaching. Because when I say testing, I don't just mean sitting down and taking a formal examination. It's a way of teaching, which is a kind of covert form of testing. And the teacher thinks she's teaching, but she's actually testing the student. You need to know what the difference is, of course. I mentioned rapport already, how crucial it is and how closely related it is to self-esteem. But to cut a long story short, I'll be building rapport or giving you examples of building rapport and self-esteem through techniques. We'll be doing rapport, we'll be doing self-esteem through the everyday activities we do in our classrooms. So I'm not going to be theorizing, I'll be giving you examples, okay? And we'll finish with a look at the transition to online teaching that Vicky experienced and how we coped with it together as I said, trainer. Oh, there I am in my youth, not so young, but it's a flashback to what we have lost in moving from a pre-pandemic period to this lockdown. And as you can see, the obvious thing is we've lost interaction. What does interaction mean? It means that we can see the students, our body language, our eyes. We have a three-dimensional relationship with these kids in a particular space, in a particular time. And digital technology, of course, diminishes all of this, strips it away. So how then can we cope with the challenge of losing this contact which gives us feedback from the students? It gives us information about how they're taking what we are giving them through their eyes, through their body language, through their voice, and so on. You see, the challenge is enormous. And the challenge fundamentally is one of, if you like, or maintaining the child's love of school. If love is too strong, at least their interest in what's going on in class. And here we all have a responsibility, the teachers, the parents, and the government, for performing this particular function, which is our main function. But when we say behind the mask, what do we mean? What is concealed behind the mask apart from the face? What else is being masked or muzzled? Well, I think from what I've seen of this year, working with Vicky, is that the children's feeling of youthful freedom and fun, as I call it, the F words here, is muzzled, is masked. You'll see paugosandapedia, as we say, when they had to wear masks. They soon got over it, as we shall see. But the fear of infecting and being infected, it does you no good in terms of motivation and self-esteem. It's not much fun, is it, being afraid of being infected in the classroom or infecting others? So you can see what I mean about the knock that self-esteem is taken in the classroom. And without self-esteem, there's not much we can do. A task for you. There you see, top right hand. You can see a question mark, which means I want you to look at these quotations from students and find the F words. They're the key words here. They're all F words, naughty words. The F can also be within a word, not necessarily at the beginning. So to give you an example of what I want, the first student says, in answer to the question, how do you feel about tests? I do badly in tests when I don't feel well. What's the key word here? Which word is going to help us link with the student's feelings? Feel obviously is the F word, it's not very difficult. And the second one, we take into account how students feel. If we ignore their feelings, we do it at our peril, as they say. When I fail, it is my fault. And when I succeed, it's luck. It's a fluke. There are several F words here. I can see a few. Can you see? Fail, fluke, fault. They're all things you see which obstruct, in Stephen Krashen's terms, the comprehensible input. And without comprehensible input, if the students don't understand and acquire what we're giving them, they're not going to do very well in exams. So all of these things are important. The fear of failure, the sense of guilt, and even if you succeed in exams, it's a question of luck, it's fluke. That's not me, that Luke is not me, that's another Luke. So don't think F. Luke is referring to me. I believe my difficulties in tests are the results of defects in me. Well, there's some F's here. I can see lots of F's. Can you see? Yeah. I believe my difficulties, the F word, difficulties. Exams make learning difficult. They put obstacles, deliberately almost, for students to overcome. Whereas a good teacher doesn't make things difficult. She makes things easier. She facilitates. She's a facilitator. The defects, the faults, again, focusing on weakness, this obsession with weakness, and the government at the moment seems to be obsessed with identifying weakness and penalizing people for their weaknesses. Exams and failure make students lose their self-esteem. Well, I mentioned that. So I think that's a nice summary of why these things are important from the point of view of the students. So listening to the students tells you, now look, I want to do well, but sometimes exams get in the way. So how can we avoid this? How can we surmount this conflict between exams and our educational role, or between testing and teaching? How do they differ, these two processes? Anyway, both very important. I'm not saying testing isn't. It's crucial. It's the be-all and end-all for many people. It's our profession. Without it, we wouldn't be making a living. So a nice way to sum it up is this classic cartoon. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Cliche, but so true. So true. You see, if you look at this picture, what do you notice about the students? Look at the students, have a good look at them. What do you notice? There's the teacher giving them instructions about the test and how fair it's going to be. But if you look at the students, what do you notice? Somebody, Katerina Zembeki, says diversity, and she's quite right. Diversity is the key word. It's the name of the game. And to put it simply, in testing, we ignore the diversity amongst students. In teaching, when we teach well, we take it as our starting point, and it is the core of what we do, the recognition of diversity. So that, in a nutshell, sums up the difference between testing and teaching. There are many, many more, but we're not here to theorize, as we said. But this diversity is taken on board in good teaching, and we address the diversity. In testing, we quite deliberately ignore it. We have to, in order to be fair. As this brilliant cartoon says, the test is fair because it ignores your individuality. It has to be the same for everybody. You see, this amazing paradox of the work we do. And the danger is that you confuse this process of ignoring diversity in a testing situation, which is perfectly legitimate, and teaching in a manner which resembles testing. One solution, where are we going to get the solution from? Well, I don't claim to have solutions, but the students may help us. Here is a student. One of the best things one of my students ever wrote when I asked the question, how do you feel about tests and exams? She said these words, and they're going to be our starting point for the methodology. She's going to give us our methodology, this student. You see, I've highlighted the key words for you. You put them together, she says, we are limited by exams. It's a red word, exams. It's a danger signal. But this good teacher, she tried to help us. How did she help us? She developed our general awareness, our way of thinking. And she helped us view the word or the world with a critical eye. I love that. That's amazing. I think it was a slip of the pen, the word and the world, but I think it captures what I'm saying, that a good teacher focuses on language and connects language with the real world and helps students develop critical thinking, which is the heart and soul of education from Socrates to the present day. As she told us, she was working on 2 levels, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to work on 2 levels today. This brief time, have I finished already? Is time up? Oh dear, oh dear. One was strictly the exam, while the other was our general education. So how can we do both? How did this teacher, wasn't me by the way, it was somebody else, and it was very inspiring to read this and think, well, perhaps I could do this. So what I'm showing you today is based on this principle of teaching for the exam and at the same time not forgetting our educational role, getting our cake and eating it. Metoschilo hortado. Okay, so how does this work? Can we get the best of both worlds? Well, the one overall strategy I have time for today is what we call learner input. And we'll see what it means. It means, no, it is. What it means is what we use, what the students bring to the classroom, whether in their thoughts, their feelings, in their language, we use it. It becomes part of the way we teach. And I'll give you specific examples. Let's see. For example, here is a classic, like George Vasilakis this morning was talking about the interview. Cliff Parry, I noticed, was talking about the interview in the context of IELTS. And here are questions I've taken from this well-known B2 examination that you're also familiar with, that you all love and know and think about fondly. The B2 exam and the questions. And the question here is, we want students to speak, and George told us what the difficulties are about speaking, what the special features of real world speaking are and examinations are. And it was very helpful, you see. And the whole point is, how do you facilitate speaking? How do you support the students' ability to speak and do the things they're expected to do in exams? They're given questions like this and expected to respond. There are ways of preparing them. I won't repeat what George and Cliff mentioned, but I can say that these questions come from outside. They come from the examination board. They're random questions. They may or may not elicit examples of language, allow the students to show off, as Vasilakis says, in the best sense of the word. It's potluck. We can do these, of course, and do all the things that George recommended. But there is another technique we can use, which is to simply say, look, either choose some of these questions that I'm giving you from a past paper, or write 3 questions you would like the examiner to examine you. It's not testing, but it's going to prepare you for the test. There will be a time, of course, where we do practice papers and train you for the exam. So you're in exam conditions. Of course, we'll do that. But now we're teaching. Now we're learning. Now we're acquiring language. And if I ask you to choose questions like, here are my questions, I would like somebody to ask me, to talk about films, because I love films, like many of you do. How do you use the internet? Well, it's easy to talk about because it's everywhere in our lives today. I'd like to talk about this. I find it very controversial and important. Which is my favorite place and why? Well, I'd love to talk about, Pelion. I love Pelion. I love the Peloponnese, all the P's I love. Peloponnese, Pelion. I'd love to talk about these places. You wouldn't be able to stop me speaking if I were a student of Spanish or whatever. So you see what I mean? This maximizes my chance of having something to say and being able to show off, as George says. See what I mean? So they write their questions, 1, 2, 3. They swap them with a partner and they interview each other. Away we go. And it should be much more motivating, much more encouraging of fluency because you want to speak and this urge to speak. And because they're your questions, they mean something. It's good for your self-esteem. See what I mean? Here's a classic cap filling. It's potluck, whether it's going to be a memorable text or not. I mean, it helps if the language we are exposing them to is interesting and memorable. And exam material sometimes is, sometimes isn't. To be honest, I found some exam texts fascinating. You know, it's a good read. But some of them are a bit boring and then instantly forgettable. So it's potluck whether this text about Columbus is going to help students remember. Because if they don't remember these phrases, these chunks, as George said, you know, they're not going to do well in exams. So it's in our interests to expose them to more than just examination type material. We may be lucky and it'll be enough. But when I ask the student to bring a painting with notes about her painting like this here, bring me your favorite painting. They were preparing for a certificate or something. Perhaps it was B1 at that level. And she came in with some notes. And I took the notes, and as you can see, I corrected the mistakes, and I gapped it, and I used it as a little test for the whole class. This is a test, but how is it different from the previous gap filling? Well, it's obvious it came from the students. It's one of their own language production examples, and I've corrected the mistakes so they feel good. They have a beautifully correct text from the pile of rubbish that they gave me, if you like. So I recycled it and I made it look lovely. And there's a picture to go with it, which is her picture. She chose this picture. She likes this painting. So the text and the picture together now make it a memorable, motivating experience. So that's going from a testing approach to a teaching approach, using what I call learner input. This has come from the learner. It's learner input. The painting has come from the learner. I could always do my own stuff, of course. George showed you examples of these classic pictures from exams. My God, how instantly forgettable they are. These examples are bloody awful. Well, for me anyway, but I'm an old dinosaur. I don't really like talking about shopping and shops. I hate the bloody things. But perhaps the teenagers who are taking the exam or whoever might, you know, find this interesting and memorable. It's potluck, I don't know. Can you think of a way we can make this more memorable? I think George said something similar along the lines of a video this morning. But how could we make this exam practice more memorable using the principle of learner input? Somebody has personalized. How are we going to personalize it? Yes, somebody says, yeah, we'll look at these questions at the end. Remember the question and answer box for questions at the end, rather than the chat box. Well, your own photos, very good. I've seen Ken Wilson do some wonderful stuff with his own photos as a teacher, but of course the students' own photos as well. They are much more interesting. Now, these aren't my photos and it's not my painting, but what I've done is I've taken two versions of the same scene. You probably recognize the painter, Van Gogh, as we say in English, Van Gogh. And this painting, Starry Night, of course, is what Van Gogh made of the place he was kind of incarcerated in. He was in some kind of mental institution. And through the windows, through the bars, he could see this, this view. And he transformed it, as you can see in the painting. So what I ask students is to talk about the differences between the two paintings. What can they see in the one? What can they see in the other? And of course, it's fascinating then to reveal that this is actually a great painter's situation. He was in this place, and this is what he did. This is the origin of this famous painting, Starry, Starry Night. And then we can do the song that goes with it, you see. So there you go. So this, I think, is much more memorable than the other examples. Now, here we have transformations. Classic, great fun. We identify the language area, the lexical, grammatical areas. How can we make this more memorable? You see, because in itself, it's instantly forgettable. Who are these people? Who is Joan? Who is Arthur? Who is I? You know, you're talking about nothing, literally. And the problem with this is it's good exam practice sometimes, but it may not be the best way to remember chunks of English and to reproduce them in the exam. You can use the same sentences exactly the same lexicogrammatical features and put real people in as subjects, like Luke, Vicky, Lilika, whoever, George, Cliff, and then you can actually talk about the students in the class or whatever by telling them to agree or disagree with the content. Is it true that you visited a museum, Luke? Which museum was it? And so on. Suddenly the text comes to life and it refers to something in the real world. So this is learner input in action with examination material. Practice material on the one hand, which is great and necessary, and the teaching version of this material on the other. So how does it work? Well, with Vicky, we said at the beginning of the year, let's get them in the state school. Now we're talking about a state school, brand new class back in October when we went back to school with the pandemic raging outside with masks and whatnot. And she asked them to write their hobbies on a piece of paper with their name, and I collected the data for her, and we summarized the composition of the class. Who are the students? There are their names. I've changed them a little bit, as you can see. They're all in Crete, so they've all got Cretan names, like Venizelos and Kornaros, Kazantzakis, but they're pseudonyms. And the interests of the students, we sum them up. So now we know something about our students. We can use this information when we devise activities. Here is an example. This is a quick gap filling. Could be either a teaching text or a test, but it's based on what the students wrote about their free time, their leisure. We've corrected the mistakes and put some blanks in so they can do a practice test or a practice text, and away they go. So you're using what they give you, and the recognition, when they recognize what you're doing, it gives them a sense of pleasure, a sense of satisfaction and respect. A test, we devised a test which was based on their mistakes. I went through their homework, and with Vicky we decided, okay, let's take these mistakes, correct them, and do a quick multiple choice for them. So this was done online as a test in this poll thing they have on WebEx, but it can be done in the classroom as well. But the point is that the student is taking a test and recognizing her own mistakes, her own sentences anonymously. You don't announce this, that number 7 is Petros's error or whatever, but they like the fact that, you know, this is what I wrote, and I can see now what the correct answer is in a very discreet way. Similarly, what we have here is students' errors in the first column, and their task is to correct. So it's all work that they produce, and typical Greek errors in many cases. To help the weaker learners, because we always have mixed ability classes, we have the scaffolding bit, the support. In the last column, there's a description of the grammatical area which has caused the problem. And the students, if they need any help, they can look at the guide in the final column and focus on the difference between, you know, say and tell, the verb plus ing, the verb plus to infinitive. So it's really building their grammar based on their own work. This is a mixture of correct and incorrect sentences to signal to them that they do get things right. They've got to sort out the right ones from the wrong ones, but they're all their own productions. Some students are very good and they're getting feedback on their achievement. Here we have a mixture of the two techniques where the sentences are a mixture of right and wrong sentences. And again, the guidance in the final column, vocabulary, grammar, information, so they can come up with their own corrections, but we're helping them to come up with their own. We're facilitating, we're facilitators. We're not, obstructing them. So we move to the last phase, which is, am I rushing too much? Oh, I don't know, how much time have I got? It's 2:43. Well, I'll be finishing in a few minutes, I promise you. So our situation then, going online, is the high school. It's Likyo, not the elementary. It's a different kettle of fish. We know teaching primary, almost impossible to teach them online. I've heard many teachers say it's not really appropriate to teach little kids, and I'm sure Montessori and all the other great educators would agree. This is no way to teach children. But the high school, I don't know, that's very controversial too. And you'll see the problems that came up because the students were disconnected quite literally and metaphorically. Very often they pretended their microphones didn't work. You couldn't see them behind the screen because they were not allowed using WebEx to see those, to use the camera. Perhaps the system couldn't take the students being visible on the camera. But the teacher couldn't see the students, and very often she couldn't hear them either, because they pretended they wouldn't switch their microphones on, and they pretended it wasn't working, and all kinds of subterfuges to avoid taking part in the lesson. So it wasn't an easy solution. Now, one approach we took was needs and wants. What do they want as learners? See if we can pander to them a little bit, give them topics that they're interested in. Again, this was mentioned this morning by Vasilakis, the importance of choosing topics that they're interested in, that make sense to them. This will loosen their tongues. So we asked them to write what they want. And as you can see, they wrote, they want their class, their topics to be about cars, makeup, hairdressing, plumbing. It's a vocational school, Likyo, so these are the kinds of things they wanted. One who wants to be a dancer. Another one, of course, crazy about football, social media. And the two odd ones are poetry and impressionism. Well, these are what we call the needs, apart from the wants, which may or may not be useful for the students, but it's what they want. Very often it's because it's related to their occupational work, their occupational aspirations to be hairdressers or plumbers. Poetry and impressionism is from the teachers saying, look, I want you also to have a broader vision of the world and language. So we're going to do a mixture of the things you want. So here is a lesson based on social media, which they requested, which was done online. Vicky taught this online, and there was an interesting discussion where she was the learner, really, because they knew much more about social media than she did, and it gave them great satisfaction to be teaching the teacher about all these different, social media sites and apps and whatnot. And they had a discussion, and the discussion worked because it was their topic. They chose it. And the ladies who were the young ladies who were interested in becoming beauticians, we devised a lesson about, beauty and all the rest of it. It's not subject that we would have chosen, but that's what they want. That's what we gave them. But the needs were, let's connect this stuff, which is pretty trivial but useful, let's say, with something powerfully creative. The language is simple. The topic is, again, beauty, and it's Frida Kahlo's take on beauty, the way she transformed herself from the left picture to the right. So there was a fascinating discussion here using very useful language for beauticians, as you can see in the questions, matching the statements to the Frida Kahlo. So they're learning English, they're learning about their occupation, but they're learning about this great artist at the same time. Brilliant, lovely. And again, to spot the difference thing, it's using pictures as we do in the exam. But what pictures and how can you forget, pictures like this? Football is what they wanted. We gave them the football they wanted. Gap filling as a test or as a teaching text. Either way, that the student who chose it was crazy. He just wouldn't stop talking. He wanted to monopolize the lesson, which makes a refreshing change. But of course, the other students couldn't get a word in edgeways. So, but it's good. It shows that the students can be made to speak if we respond through learner input. Another example, gap filling, two other paintings that they chose, you see, or the teacher chose in this case. And again, they are much more memorable, and it's an example of meeting their needs as well as their wants, broadening their horizons, especially as art has been banned from the Likyo by this very wise government. A nice, simple use of Van Gogh here on the level of needs, talking about his bedroom, using very simple language for the weaker students. And finally, we come back to the classroom. The three phases we're looking at is the initial lockdown and life behind the mask. The second phase is the online phase and trying to carry on when the students hiding behind the camera, pretending their microphone doesn't work, so on, and connecting from up an olive tree, or that's literally what they did, or while they were lying in bed. We come back to the classroom and we ask them, how do you feel about the last few months? And how do you feel now that the government has said your area is not a red area COVID-wise, and you have to come back to school? This is very interesting what they said. So we took what they said, as you can see, and we again transformed it into proper English, and we'll show you how we used it in a minute. But they say things like, I feel great because I can see my friends after 3 months. I feel happy because we've stopped online questions. Online learning was tiring and boring. How fascinating to listen to what people really think about a year or almost a year of online teaching. And this one from Greek, she used Greek because she's a very weak student. She can't say anything, she can't write anything. So a very good use of the mother tongue. You give me the Greek text, and I'll give you, from the mother tongue text, an English text to work with. So she says she's pleased that schools have opened. She likes face-to-face. She doesn't like using the smartphone. So I'm more attentive in class. And we had dozens of these responses. So it's fascinating in itself to read how they feel about online teaching, but we recycled this into a discussion, encouraging speaking and reading here, as you can see. It began as a gap filling based on their own text. These are all their own texts. They're all corrected, they gap filled, and then, of course, let's discuss which ones do you agree with, which do you disagree with. And they're all from the class itself. It makes a world of a difference. It's all good English, and it's at the right level, it's comprehensible input, and it's something that boosts their self-esteem. So to sum up, very simply, what then is the difference between the two things I've been talking about in this short time? That's a chart that sums up the two processes of testing. If you define testing, you could say it's all about competition, focus on the individual. If you share, you're cheating, you're given marks, not feedback. It's all about fear, uniformity, lack of diversity, terror, not error as a step, as I call it. And the teacher is the focus, or the examination board, whoever they are, these impersonal bodies. And those are the good things in the green column, the things that build on cooperation, self-correction, correcting each other, group work, sharing. It's not cheating, it's sharing, giving feedback, not just marks, building self-esteem instead of fear, drawing on the diversity as a strength, and learning from errors. Their errors as a step, as the great Julian Edge said, there's no such thing as error, only steps in learning. And the focus is the learner. I'm not saying you only do the one, you can do both the red and the green. So my friends, this is my favorite quote of all time from a student. This is my teacher, Mrs. Cooper, when I was 8 years old. Let's say it's her. And she believed in us all. I was a naughty little pupil, but Mrs. Cooper, she believed in me, and as one of my students said, made me believe in myself. And at the end of the day, this is what we're trying to do. We're doing it rather than talking about it by using these techniques of what I've called learner input. The students get the message that you believe in them. You don't have to say it, but they see it in the fact that you're valuing their texts and you're building the learning process using them as well as the examination body, as well as the textbook, as well as your own preferences. I don't know how I'm doing. I think I should finish now. It's time to go. There's my email. Thank you very much.